All right, so this is going to be the first video of the cognitive function series. Before I really dive into this series, I do want to talk about something in very particular, and that particular thing is that originally I designed this to be a non-personal video based with slides and images and a teleprompter and getting really into depth about the video quality using a high-def camera. But what I realize is that it takes so much effort, and I can only put so much effort into this video, and I can't spend that much time. I just don't have that much time right now. So I really want to get this content out, and I'm just going to not ad-lib this, as I've taken a lot of time to write the content in a very decent way, so that way the information gets across effectively. All right, so welcome to the first video of the cognitive function series, and this is extroverted sensing. I have made it my personal mission to get down to the very fundamentals of what comprises each personality type, beginning with the components that make that type, and those components are your cognitive functions, and building upward to a complete type understanding. So it starts with this functional series and of the cognitive stack, and then it's going to go into individual type analysis, and maybe I'll get into more compatibility and communication between types. With that being said, don't worry if you haven't looked at other videos. This video is designed to give you a strong basic understanding of types, actually a little more than basic, pretty advanced understanding. It does help to have a little bit of understanding of how Myers-Briggs works. So if this is your first video watching on my channel or any Myers-Briggs video, you may want to check out some other videos first, because it may be a little advanced if you don't know like the acronyms like SE for extroverted sensing or NE for extroverted intuition. So this video is designed to be highly informative. I may go on tangents occasionally, but I will warn you that I will do my best to keep it concise. And it is intended to build you up from a basic level of understanding into an advanced level of understanding in this function. And as always, feel free to subscribe at any time or share any of this content at any time if this content is valuable to you. So before we really get into the details of what extroverted sensing is, I'd like to cover a few basics that seem to be widely misunderstood, even by people in the MBTI community. Myers-Briggs is about preferences, which means that we all use aspects of all aspects of the psyche and not just a few of them. And that's where I think people are a little confused, is that when I say this is in my stack, it doesn't mean I don't use those other functions. They have another way of manifesting themselves into my personality. And so we use all aspects of the psyche, not just a few cognitive functions, while completely ignoring the others, unless, of course, that you don't have the development in those areas where it's so unconscious that you don't use it at all. And I think that's the big issue there. So, but that these preferences, okay, let me rewind. What this means is, in simple terms, is that we are born with these innate natural preferences that do not change, and these natural preferences govern the development of our character, which is an entirely different subject in itself, but the development of our character is rooted in our values, our upbringing, the cultural values, the place around us, the world around us, and those type of things. So what this is essentially saying is that extroverted sensing may appear differently in one person than it appears in another. This is why typing someone by cognitive functions is not the easiest thing to do, because it creates this problem where you're looking for what you think extroverted sensing looks like, and despite what it actually is, because the function actually encases itself, rather an archetype encases itself inside of a function, and that function is going to display differently. And I don't have a good analogy for that right now, but if I do come up with one, I'll try to add it in the comment section on the video, or maybe I'll just add an annotation there. So another way to think about your preferences is like hardware, which lays a foundation for you or your circumstances to develop those characters. So again, your preferences is hardware, doesn't change over time. So like I was born left-handed, and no matter how many people taught me how to do stuff right-handed, or this is how you shoot a basketball, this is how you write, this is how you play golf, this is how you swing a baseball bat. No matter what I was taught, I learned those things, and I can do it effectively with my right hand, but my body still wants to use my left hand naturally. And even though I may not even be trained in my left hand wants to take over naturally. And this is what this is about, is learning what is most natural to you, not what you're good at. So it's not a strengths-based assessment. It is very much or a traits-based assessment. Is very much an indicator, and it's forced questioning, which is basically giving you an idea of left versus right versus it's either one or the other. And that's what this is about. So it's not measuring the efficiency or the effectiveness. So if you're doing a cognitive function test where you're measuring the strength of cognitive functions, then you're creating a problem for you, because you cannot translate that into Myers-Briggs. So Myers-Briggs in no way, shape, or form determines your character, only the underlying hardware, which I've already expressed, and not the filter you choose of the way you take in information. So it doesn't determine what filters you use to deliver information. It only gives you an idea of the information that's involved in the process. So it gives you an idea of how you take in information, but not necessarily the filter it goes through to make that possible. So, and it also teaches you how you come to decisions, not the actual decisions themselves. It doesn't teach you like, okay, so if you're using TE, then this is the choice you're going to make. It tells you how you actually reach that decision and what process you use to be able to come to that conclusion most naturally. Not so much, oh, this is absolutely what you're going to decide. A TE user would never do that, or a FE user would never do that. That's not what Myers-Briggs is about. That's why I try to use the words may and could and likely versus absolute, because we don't know what people are going to do, because the functions, again, an archetype, the functions are encasing an archetype. And if you don't know what an archetype is, basically it's an imprint, either a collective imprint passed down through generations, or it's a personal imprint based on life experience that created a complex with the ego. There's a big discussion on that, which I'm not going to cover in this video. With that being said, let's get started talking about extroverted sensing and what extroverted sensing actually is. Sensing is a perceiving function that prefers to take in concrete, tangible sensory data instead of intangible, theoretical, or conceptual data. When someone prefers sensing, they'll adopt an attitude where they focus most of their attention naturally. We talked about this in the other videos, but again, where you're focusing your attention naturally is a key for people who prefer any perception, who have any perception function, is where they're focusing their attention. Okay, and this attitude can be ruled of thoughts and subjectivity, so they can be focusing their attention in here as a response to what's happening with the environment, or they could be focusing their attention on a decision-making process in here, which can be a response as of what happens in the environment, and they're making a decision on that information or judging that information per se, or the external world of actions and objectivity, extroversion. Unlike traditional theories on extroversion and introversion, Myers-Briggs typology orientates the words of extroversion and introversion to be where one's focus is at any given time, and which means that one may be making judgments in the world of introversion while they're actually perceiving in the world of extroversion. Usually this happens at the same time. There's a very, very fast passing of information. So someone can go from introverted, extroverted, introverted, extroverted. In Myers-Briggs typology, it's not that you're an introvert or you are an extrovert. That is not part of Myers-Briggs typology. It is you either prefer introversion or you prefer extroversion. And unlike many other personality tools, Myers-Briggs does not compartmentalize introverts and extroverts, as its fundamental philosophy includes the usage of both introversion and extroversion. Like I said, both of these are used in all types, so don't say you're an introvert or an extrovert if you're talking specifically Myers-Briggs. It is not Myers-Briggs philosophy. Despite some of the cognitive functions being seen as traditionally more introverted or extroverted in another, there may be someone who prefers extroversion, but they may look like an introvert based on what your societal definition is, or by book definition, or by any other definition, in the sense of social, in the sense of object or objectivity. You can be extroversion, but you can have a preference for extroversion, even though your extroversion is oriented around objects. It's not oriented around people per se. So that's why understanding the functions is absolutely critical, because you'll hear people say that, oh, I'm an introvert, but really, are you? What do you do? I mean, and if we understand this, then we start understanding how to actually get an accurate type on people. It's no longer about introverts or extroverts, or I'm an I versus an E. You realize you use both. You just have one function ahead of another, and we can get into how that all works once we start getting into the broader types of personality typing. So thereby, once this is clear and you understand that sensing has two potential attitudes. So we talked about introversion, extroversion. Sensing has two attitudes. Obviously, it can be introverted or extroverted. And people who prefer introverted sensing prefer their subjective impression of the object which has received their focus over the object's actual physical, tangible properties. So that object, just so you know, and just to clear that up, could be a series of facts or an actual physical object, a sound, a taste, or a feeling of something. Essentially, it is the object of attention outside the self. So when I say object, I'm talking about something that caught your attention, and then that triggered either where your focus is either in here or on that object itself. So to quickly understand how these two functions work, and introverted sensing and extroverted sensing, which are the same function with a different attitude, Introverted sensing would focus on their impression of that object. So what that means is the object triggered something, and now I'm focused on what that object reminds me of, or what it connects with, or something it's familiar with, or an experience I had, and that's where my focus is. It's not that extroverted sensors don't have that. It's just not where their attention is. It's not where their focus is. So they naturally don't, they're a little more out of touch with that. That doesn't come naturally to them because they're so focused on here. It's like, you can't be, essentially, you can't be super focused on multiple things. You're either focused on one or the other. So if your preferred preference is extroverted sensing, you're going to be focused on the object outside of itself. So with that being clear, like I said, although we can use both of these abilities, introverted and extroverted sensing, one has a natural preference. The person who prefers extroverted sensing, the SP types, so any type that has SP in their acronym, generally feel that the subjective distorts the perception of concrete reality. So sometimes they don't feel naturally, like, since it's out of focus and it's out of their realm, they may feel that it's distorting actual reality, and it may be that subjective impression may not be as accurate because they don't trust this function as much. So naturally, it's like me trusting my right hand. Why would I want to do that when I know my left hand can perform better, and I trust my left hand because I know it's going to get the job done? So these SP types naturally will trust their primary focus, so they're not going to trust these subjective impressions. They may feel that it distorts the actual information coming in. And because of their natural preference for this, they may be seen pursuing the novelty of their experience rather than comparing it with something they have experienced previously. So let's take this example. This will give you a good idea of what's going on here. The SP type may be enjoying a dinner and simply enjoying the flavor of a new type of beer, while the SJ type, which is the type that prefers introverted sensing, may be seen comparing the flavor to another beer that tastes similar. Okay, so this doesn't mean it's going to happen every time. So if someone doesn't do this, it doesn't mean they're not an SJ. Just an example, and for curiosity's sake, to help provide information for you. The SJ type may be focused on what the beer reminds them, or hey, this beer tastes like this beer, or it's similar. Or I taste the hops, or how many hops. They'll be able to really define a lot more of what's going on in that sensory experience in comparison. We'll get into introverted sensing later. Whereas the SP type may say, wow, this is great beer, tastes really great. So there's two different ways of looking at this, and the SP type, again, is extroverted sensing preference, where introverted sensing is specifically looking at comparison to archetypes they create. So to give you some biases, what extroverted sensing is, extroverted sensing is commonly believed to be a function used by the dumb and impulsive people. The dumb or impulsive people who find themselves doing stunts and not thinking ahead, or saying the wrong things at the wrong time, usually moments before their death, stating something along the lines of, dude, watch this. Or it's seen as a function of someone rushing into action, guns blazing, without any fear of the future or its consequences. And SC types are often seen as top-notch athletes with lightning-fast reflexes, and they're great warriors in battle, or whatever else. They're the gung-ho Rambo type figures that we have painted over the years. That's very much your SP types. Although these biased remarks can be true in some instances, it does not encompass the complete profile of what extroverted sensing actually is, and in many cases, the contrary can be more true. So I prefer to call the SE types the realistic tacticians. Whereas extroverted thinking is focused on what is known to be true, introverted thinking is what is precise and accurate. Introverted intuition is what will be, and extroverted intuition is what could be. Introverted feeling is what resonates and harmonizes with self, and extroverted feeling is what is valued, and introverted sensing is what was, and extroverted sensing is simply what is. So there's a quick description of all these different types, and understanding that, it makes extroverted sensing an entirely different category of its own. It's complete and utter realism. Whereas every other type is organizing or modifying or looking at possibilities or something that's not there, I would definitely say the SE types, the SP types, have the most realistic perspective on what's going on in the world around them. It doesn't mean that the other types are imaginative or out there or not accurate, or they're just being in la-la land. It just means that extroverted sensing naturally has a focus in other directions. So when extroverted sensing is prominent in someone's personality type, primarily the SP types, and is developed in a healthy way, it will tend to suppress the subjective element of sensory information. So when you're more active in extroverted sensing, what's going to happen is that you're going to have this angle where it's going to suppress the introverted function, because the more you're focused on extroversion in this particular thing, the less you're going to get from introversion in the sense of the same function. So it suppresses the subjective element. So if you're really involved, it's kind of like when you're getting in a sport and you're performing that sport and you're focused on where your body is at the exact time and where your foot is and where your arm is and where everything is at the right time, what's coming at you, if the ball's coming at you, all that is getting into the zone. You're not thinking about, wow, that ball reminds me of the past. That ball reminds me of this. You're thinking about how to hit it, what angle, and all that, and you're not even thinking about it. Your body just feels it. That's extroverted sensing. Whereas introverted sensing may be judging, wow, the ball's coming at me. I wonder how fast it's going. Oh, in comparison, I've seen a ball like this go 89 miles per hour before. Bam, you get hit, and it's game over. So everybody can experience extroverted sensing in their period of life. They can experience it. It's important to, when you get into the zone, that's really what extroverted sensing is, and we can talk about that, and we're going to dive in that in here a little bit. But again, it suppresses that subjective element of sensory information and it focuses on the raw sensory information. So it has a natural preference to see things exactly as they are, and it values concrete reality, and it does not trust intrapersonal information attached to objects themselves. Again, the focus is what's outside of self. For example, it's not common to find people who preference extroverted sensing collecting memorabilia because it aims to seize the moment and to follow physical impulses while not attaching much significance to them. So if you find people collecting, souvenirs or, like I said, memorabilia, then there's a attachment to that, and that's that subjective impression, what that object means. And so you'll find that introverted perception types will generally be more attached to these things, and I can go into detail about that when we go into the introverted functions of introverted sensing and introverted intuition. So the detachment that extroverted sensors feel helps them be more attuned to the environment, often to the point where it seems that their senses are more heightened than other types. Although this is not true that their sensations are any more experiential than the other types, their attention definitely goes toward the strongest sensory stimuli in order to multiply real-life experiences and to keep the focus off attaching subjective meaning to those experiences. Unique to extroverted sensing types, all incoming sensory data is accepted without discrimination, which means that they are generally able to take in much more visual and tactile information than the other types without being completely overloaded, as they completely trust the immediate sensory data and would prefer to rely on nothing else. The phrase, "it is what it is," comes to mind when I think of these SE types, as they prefer to not place judgment on the immediate sensory data, but rather form judgments around this sensory data. Because of their high trust for this data, SE types are generally able to make well-informed, on-the-fly decisions without pre-rehearsing their thoughts. And this is what makes them excel at these events that move too quickly for the thought process and logical analysis. For this reason, the SE types and the SP types define pragmatic adaptability. So realistic adaptability in the moment, because they're catching those things right then and there. And so those who have a healthy use of SE can be seen as resourceful, energetic, and zestful action takers. And because of this high level of comfort in the world of action, many times the SP types excel in the realm of their senses, whereas other types do not display the same comfort, leading to the assumption that SPs have more keen reflexes. And although we know this is not true, as we cleared it up previously, but it can also be true at times, but it's not always the case. As type, ESTP, ESFP, ISFP, and ISTP, only determines cognition and doesn't determine actual ability. As you know, I believe practice is what the answer is, and it's not so much about how you do. Now, you may have a certain advantage because of a certain type, but it doesn't mean that's the way it is. So where most may find pressure stressful, the SP types tend to find as its primary focus is on being resourceful with what is right here, right now. It tends to feel a certain oneness with the physical world and generally directly understands its impact on it. So it understands the physical world around them, and they by simply being aware of what's going on, and if they do this, this is what's going to happen. If they do this, this is what's going to happen. So some SEUs are totally connected to their environment around them and everything around them being a part of them, so they are connected to everything around them. And if they move a certain way, so does the rest of the force of the universe, or whatever they do. This can often be seen in people who practice martial arts, where they are taught to be present. And he's talked about, you got to be here now, present. Well, you got to be aware of what's going on, be aware of the grasshopper of your foot. That's all like very SE and being aware of what's going on. Since being present comes more naturally to the SP types, you often see them leaning toward practicing activities that require this higher level of presence. So to the other extreme, they can create the illusion that their life is a result of accidental outer happenings, and strong use of this function can make the user appear quite jittery and antsy when insufficient activity is not present. And in some cases, they can easily fall asleep from inactivity or excessive theoretical information. Researcher and professor Dr. Dario Nardi discovered that SE types generally show a constant tennis hop type of brain pattern. Essentially, it's sending low amplitude signals to all regions so that it can quickly respond to any given situation by redirecting energy to an already semi-activated region. So it's kind of like, you know, if you're standing still and then you have to move, you have to generate a lot more force than if you're already moving and you just need to shift direction, right? So imagine turning a car, but not putting much pressure on the gas. The car has a harder time turning, but if you're going 60 miles per hour, you barely nudge the wheel, the car's gonna yank. It's the same thing. If you're kind of moving and you're moving along and you just need to shift direction, then it's gonna essentially, the brain, the way that works according to Professor Nardi, is that this region of the brain is going to become very immediately active to respond to the situation. Hence why I call them the realistic tacticians, because they're able to give them that reaction very quickly in the moment. This is why SE dominant users like ESTPs or ESFPs usually can be very funny or very quick in solving problems that are immediate right here, right now. I'm sure you've probably experienced this certain readiness by playing the common and often painful game that comes to mind is the game called Red Hands, or I think that's the only way, essentially, or Slap Hands, or whatever people do. Essentially, one player, get their hands like this, and one's on the offensive, and hold their hands palms underneath the other player's hands and palm down. So they're lightly touching, and the objective is to slap the other person's hand before they move it. Recall the state of readiness when you're expecting that hand to move, or that's first off, you have to use SI to recall that state of readiness, because that's an impression that you had of that experience. But just think about that experience. Use your SI, your introverted sensing, to recall that experience and think about that state of readiness. What was your mindset like? Were you really prepared? Were you zoned in, or were you thinking about life, and were you thinking about consciousness? And you'll find that certain people they're more prone, as where if I play that game and I'm getting bored or I'm thinking about something else, which comes to me more naturally, then I'll probably get slapped. And so you'll notice that in the state of readiness, you may not be thinking ahead, and it's not very high on the priority list, like what's going to happen after my hand gets slapped, because it's going to slow your reaction time. It takes you away from that moment. And this is how SE users prefer to be throughout their daily experience. It's not that they don't think, it's they prepare to be, they are molding their day to be prepared. That's the key, is be prepared for anything to happen in a moment. As they trust and focus sensory data, that's what is the key. And that is whether it's going to be a funny experience, whether it's going to be a problem they need to solve, they're right here, right now, and they seek that novelty. And as a result, SE users frequently experience boredom when there isn't enough going on in the environment around them. So this is where they have challenges in school, is because sometimes it's just sitting there for too long with a boring professor can literally put them to sleep, and that is not a joke. In addition, Dr. Nardi discovered that SE users have the ability to defer stress when engaging in a high crisis situation, which I thought was really interesting, because they can take in information and they can deal with high stress, and it doesn't bother them in the moment. It's completely gone. They don't even feel it. In essence, they're able to zone into a totally relaxed state in high emergencies, so much that they feel the stress that they deferred long after the event is over. And that can appear as a headache, stomachache, or any other stress-like symptom occur, and it can occur hours later. And they may not know why they feel that way. It's because they actually deferred that problem until later, because their brains are wired in a way to be quick responders. This was what makes them great in ER, emergency room, as a pilot, anything that requires that immediate stress deference and to maintain, maintain order in a situation. So this is what makes them really, really great action-oriented people. So let's talk about a little bit about types that use SE. I want to go in a little bit of detail about each one. When dominant SE, which is extroverted sensing, when dominant SE is followed by introverted thinking, as in the ESTP type, it uses general logical principles of introverted thinking to produce the resourceful, on-the-fly troubleshooting strength that is often known of ESTPs. However, because the ESTP prefers sensing over thinking, it is not uncommon for them to sacrifice their logical ability in favor of novel experiences, causing them to potentially be caught in the moment and acting in response to irrelevant sensory data, or doing things that may seem lacking a clear objective. So However, one must understand that their primary objective is to maximize that experience and exploit opportunity and solve immediate problems with given sensory data, using their secondary introverted thinking to evaluate, structure, and order their observations for the purpose of being able to better embrace the next opportunity. The ESTP feels that judging sensory information may limit their opportunities in the moment, making them appear more playful than their introverted cousin, the ISTP. So again, they have a higher priority. Now, I've written all this. This is stuff I've written. I'm just kind of going through little points and bullet points here to make this process a lot easier and make this video as short as possible so you guys aren't listening to this for 6 hours straight. Originally, I would have slowed down, so I do apologize for the speed, but I think there is always a rewind or a go back button. I say rewind. Wow, I just aged myself. Okay, so contrary to the ESTP, the ISTP, in the ISTP, the SE function, or extroverted sensing function, follows introverted thinking, which means that they prefer to take apart raw, untampered, concrete data to further refine their logical principles and down to the fundamental core components. So these components are then assembled in the mind of the ISTP, where it acquires a semi-universal adaptability. This creates a seemingly on-the-fly response, but unlike the ESTP, they actually rely on the understanding of these frameworks to be able to ingeniously respond to a situation without second thought. The ISTP at the core does not want to maximize each experience, but to place judgment on large amounts of data to isolate the core of practical problems to be solved accurately as possible. So at first look, it looks like the ISTP may appear smarter than the ESTP, and this is just not necessarily true. When you really talk to an ESTP and you tap into the way they see the world, and from a logical perspective, it can actually appear quite differently. And that's where the key is, and understanding that makes a huge difference in the ISTP versus the ESTP, is that they're not one type is smarter than another type. So at first glance, this can be a very often bias that people see, and people always think introverts are smarter than extroverts, and that's not the case. You just got to remember where their focus is. And so the ISTP's primary focus is accuracy and not playing with potential solutions through trial and error. So they want to make sure they minimize their trial and error experience. Again, they're not interested in experience, they're interested in learning about logical frameworks. That's their key right there. That's their primary, that's their motivation. Just like the ESTP's motivation is novel experiences. So they may feel that even though they're not, they may feel that through not placing immediate judgment on incoming sensory data, improperly distorts their logical principles and frameworks to the point of being reconsidered. So what I mean by this is that if they're not placing that immediate judgment on sensory data, so they use that TI to process sensory data, they lose that logical principle because they see there's a lot of irrelevant sensory data that may not pertain to what they're trying to solve or what they're trying to understand. So for example, if an ISTP is working on a truck or a car and somebody talks to them, or they come across a tool and the tool's acting up, or and it's not working, and they have a backup, the question is, do they work on fixing the tool that doesn't work, or do they focus their attention on what they know and fix the car, then worry about the tool later? It's the same kind of thing. It's prioritization, and that's for the ISTP. They may prefer to finish the car first because that's what they know and that's what they refine, whereas the tool may be irrelevant at that time. In the ESTP, it may be a new challenge to take on the tool because it's a new novel experience, and they may choose the tool over fixing the car simply because it's a new experience. So this is just a exaggerated example of how this cognition works. So this can tend to make the ISTP seem more focused, stern, and sterile in their actions and speech because they are focused on those things. And they can appear very similar to the ESTP, though, in their sense for adventure and adrenaline. In ESFPs, the dominant extroverted sensing is followed by introverted feeling. So much like the ESTP and the ESTP, the ESFP also likes to plunge right into activities without second thought. However, unlike their thinking counterpart, their orientation is not the application of logical frameworks that leads to problem solving of systematic problems that are in the moment. They're not interested in necessarily looking at those frameworks, but to the application of interpersonal and personal values that leads to greater in-the-moment enjoyment with people and solving those problems of others and making people feel good or making themselves feel good. So it's very much more focused on what their values are. So again, this is a little more subjective because I can't speak in it in the sense of logic. It's all dependent on what that person's values are. Although their feelings are directed inward through introverted feeling, they are often seen stimulating others around them for fun or exciting activities. And the reason for this being, they will be further explained in the introverted feeling video portion of this series, as I don't want to go in that detail during this video. So this leads to the ESFP's stereotype as the party animal, not to imply that they're always seen at parties or even if they enjoy parties. But this is just an example to understand how the ESFP cognition works. So the ESFP uses their internal values to exploit the most fun or novel experience in a situation, usually involving other people. That's where their focus is. Again, they're focused on values and interpersonal and intrapersonal values, depending on what their value system is, but that's where their focus is. That's what they're looking to get out of a situation. And so as an ESTP enjoys that solving problems and that quick troubleshooting, the ESFP is looking at a good time or being able to work with their counterparts. And they are often found bringing everyone they like and know to a situation to maximize that opportunity for a fun, creating what they believe to be an ideal sensory experience. So last but not least, in the ISFP, the introverted feeling takes preference over extroverted sensing, which means they are primarily focused on using the details of the present moment to further refine their sophisticated, deep, and complex world of intrapersonal values. This can create a deep stubbornness in their values because they support the development of their views with real, tangible, concrete data. It can be seen and said that they are more interested in understanding the deep frameworks of their value systems, or spoken of value systems, and using sensory information as a tool to accomplish that which, like the ISTP, is focused on building their understanding of concrete world through logical application. The ISFP is looking at using the concrete world to better understand their own value framework. So the ISFP is very much interested in exploring these deep passions of theirs, and obviously they want to be able to find a way to exude these passions into the world and feel the need to express themselves. So, like I said, this is pretty sophisticated so far. I know there's a lot of content. Like I said, I do want to make this as short as possible, and I got a few more things to cover with y'all, and hopefully we can wrap this up here in a little bit. So extroverted sensing, I do want to know that it's on a polarity with introverted intuition. So as you can see in these types, the use of introverted intuition takes a large back seat. When you have extroverted sensing at the top, introverted intuition takes a large backseat, and it's very rarely felt in these types. As they don't really trust SI, they really don't trust NI, introverted intuition. As by nature, extroverted sensing yearns to bring new and raw sensory experience to understand everything that is going on right now. And this raw data is passed to introverted intuition. So it takes it in, and when it's subjectively processed without being judged, it's subjectively processed. That's when introverted intuition does its job, and laces it with subjective abstraction. So it's abstracting something from it. And like I said, this concept will be further explained in the introverted intuition video. However, when SE is active in consciousness, introverted intuition is nearly completely disengaged. So when SE is being used, introverted intuition, like introverted sensing, it gets pushed out of consciousness. In other words, they have a very suppressive relationship with each other. And so these extroverted sensing dominants that enter the world of introverted intuition can often feel they are losing their ground, or they're being lifted off the ground and they're not being realistic. And this is not a good place for a lot of extroverted sensors because they are really rooted in reality. So this is a reason why a lot of extroverted sensors actually enjoy the process of being removed from the ground in the sense of usage of drugs or any kind of influence or any kind of different way of doing that, because they want to know what it's like sometimes, and they enjoy the experience of not being on the ground. And that's where they lose their sense of reality, and sometimes it can take them to very dismal places. So, however, without this small background use of introverted intuition, extroverted sensing really wouldn't have any motivation to do anything, because it anticipates a certain experience. And so, like, example, I want to go, let's say I'm an extroverted sensor and I know I want to go jump off a 40-foot cliff and dive into the water. Why? Because I know how it's going to feel. I know I know what's going to happen. I know how cool it's going to be. And all that's introverted intuition. I know how it feels. I know what's going to happen. And that I'm predicting the future. And that's a small background of introverted intuition working with this function in unconscious fashion. So let's talk about the two types that actually use SE in their unconscious area. And so it's their unconscious area, so non-preferred types. In ENJs, which is the NTJs and ENFJs, extroverted sensing is in the tertiary position, so that these types feel a sense of unconscious confidence in their ability to react to the cues in the present environment, but they still have a natural preference to plan ahead, and if prepared to act on their feet, and they will act on their feet if it's necessary, but again, it's not their natural preference, and they still may not be able to react as fast or effectively as types who have really high levels of focus on that SE, and they focus on extroverted sensing where it's higher in consciousness. So this is why ENJs, like ENTJs or ENFJs, are more apt to plan less and act a little more. Not only because they're not so much thinking everything through and every possible outcome, but as a dominant introverted intuitive would, but they also know that they trust themselves enough to be able to react in the moment if necessary. Whereas in INJs, like INTJs and INFJs, it is in the very inferior position, so it starts a complete mistrust in the physical world. So this is very different from ENJs because they don't trust the physical world, often at times as if it isn't even real. So they are very guilty of having these out-of-body experiences, which other types don't really have. And they may tend to believe that their understanding of the world is the way they will get to the truth of reality. So again, these types are primarily focused on the ultimate truth outside of reality, everything and all-encompassing. So they have the uncanny attachment to their own intelligence, not for the sake of arrogance, but to keep them focused on what they believe is grounded, which is not what's here and now. So you'll hear a lot of INJs talk about consciousness and what's outside of it and what is our reality, if it's fake or not. These are very much introverted intuitive questions because they're so removed from extroverted sensing. And this is why INJs prefer to plan everything also, is because they don't trust that incoming sensory information, because to them, what's in their head is more real than reality itself, naturally. As this function begins to mature, or as it should, which is typically expected to in the later years of one's life, they begin to become more in tune with the sensory world and begin to trust it a little bit more. Not that they will ever trust it as much as they trust their intuition. So in order to develop extroverted sensing, which is the last part of this, no function can function completely by itself without the assistance from the rest of the psyche. So extroverted sensing in itself is not a highly social function, so it's not uncommon for the SP types to express their thoughts in words, but rather through action. So they're not interested in necessarily using words to define their experiences, or to express themselves that way. It's usually through action. So think of it when you look at an ESTP, ISTP, or any SP type, that they prefer to move because they feel like that's the best way to express themselves, whether it's through they want to express their logical frameworks, or they want people to see their ability to troubleshoot problems in the moment, or they want people to see those things. And with FI types like ESFP and ISFP, they are very much focused on their expression of self or their expression of values. This is why you'll find a lot of ISFPs going to art, to music, and to performance arts, is because they feel like that's the only way they can really express their values. They do not trust the world of ideas, and they do not trust anything else but action. So they're not focused on extroverting something. Again, they're extroverted sensors, so they're not going to extrovert feeling up front. We can talk about that in a little bit, how that all works. But right now, extroverted sensing individually does not have the ability to make discernments about the social nuances, nor, like I said, it's not an extremely social function, so it's not going to really identify with social nuances. It's only going to react to present data. And even though SE appears in the SP types as a conscious function, there are circumstances where this function may be overused or underdeveloped. So this means that ESTP types, or ESFPs, or ISFPs, or ISTPs, all the SP types can be over-preferred, which means it's overdeveloped and it's repressing the other function in their psyche, or it's underused. And that can very happen. It can be underdeveloped. So if you have an ESTP who's not using SE very well, he may rely on TI to overcompensate, or rely on any other function, even SI. So again, this is why it can be difficult to type someone based on cognitive theory, is because it creates a problem in being able to actually type someone effectively, because you could be catching them at a wrong point in their life. Now, I don't say this to confuse you. So if you are looking at a type, or you are a certain type and now you're questioning yourself, don't do that, because everybody moves through a period of time. Unless you really don't believe you are the type you say you are, then you need to go back and look at it. When SE is over-preferred in a type, the subject may appear too impulsive. The person who is using SE, too impulsive and not being aware of potential outcomes or the consequences of their actions, or being able to effectively solve a problem in the moment. And when this function is under-preferred or underdeveloped, one may appear not to know what is going on in the present moment at all. They may be lost in space. They may be stuck in their own head or forced into introversion. So in order to develop SE with an intuitive preference, which means that if it's in the lower part of your stack, which means that sensing is out of preference, or if sensing is somewhere in the bottom two functions of your stack, you got to realize that it's not going to come very natural to you. So turning off the intuition perception can be quite challenging. So when you experience the world as is, it's not easy for intuitives because we naturally are attracted to what the world could be or what the world will be. So the key to this is to not draw conclusions or contemplate what you can do with anything in the data. If you prefer sensing, simply focus on the task at hand as long as possible. And so people who prefer sensing, they focus on that task and they just do it. Whereas people who prefer intuition can tend to read a book and the next thing they know, they're off into space. This is why intuitives don't read books front to back. They actually will read a portion of it, a paragraph, 2 paragraphs, 6 paragraphs, or skip between, and then they say they've read it. And you'll notice that in a lot of people who prefer intuition is because they have a very difficult time, keeping their attention on what's actually in front of them as their mind tends to go in fantasy land, where sensing types are more likely to go through it. Now, extroverted sensing types find that reading and looking at books and text on page can be rather boring. If you look at this, you'll see that there's a lot of boring text, and extroverted sensing types may look at it and go, wow, you know what? I don't think I can ever read that. So a key for intuitive types or people looking to develop extroverted sensing in itself is actually focus on reading the very popular spiritual book called The Power of Now. This book is by Eckhart Tolle, I believe, or Tolle, however he pronounces his name. And it has a numerous amount of little exercises you can do to remain present here and now, right in the moment. It does work on both aspects of sensing, introverted sensing and extroverted sensing. Of course, Eckhart Tolle is not focused on Myers-Briggs, but you can see the differences. Sometimes he tells you to be aware of you, and sometimes he tells you to be aware of your environment. So both of that is inside and outside. So this really can help develop your lower sensing functions if you're an intuitive preference. It has these exercises, like I said. In the meantime, you can simply take any living experience and be aware of everything around you. Do not place judgment, attach labels, or even think of the memory. Just notice them. Notice the trees, notice the air, notice the smell in the air, notice the food, notice the taste, eat slower. These are plenty of ideas and ways to develop your extroverted sensing function. In addition, take up a hobby which requires complete focus on the present moment and physical skills involved, and such as a new sport or maybe a party trick or whatever you want to do, and practice each skill with complete focus. Do not let your mind disengage, but be aware of the physical sensations as you do things correctly or incorrectly and adjust them as necessary. You can also test the development of this function simply by doing the following drill. Think of a potential crisis in your immediate environment. So this is kind of a brainstorming activity. So if you think of a potential crisis in your immediate environment, give yourself 2 minutes to list all the important factors in the environment and the reactions of people in your proximity. In 30 seconds, decide quickly without further thought, and then write that down what you're going to do. Share with someone who preferences extroverted sensing, such as an ESTP or ESFP, and ask them what you might have missed, and therefore you can see what their angle is. And this also helps you understand these people who prefer these types more effectively. I know ESTP off the top of my head who can definitely beat me at this game. He's very good at doing this, finding everything in the environment to be able to utilize to make things happen right here and now. And that's where you get this this warrior action hero, is because that's what creates that bias, is because they can make anything out of anything and make anything work, and therefore they always win. So this is extroverted sensing in a nutshell. It's a long video. I tried to fly through it as much as possible to be respectful of you guys' time, and hopefully I'm going to put in some, I'm actually going to put in a little table of contents in the comment section so you can skip through the different areas which I covered. Therefore, you can actually skip around, because this is a long video. And I don't know how long, but I can already tell you I feel exhausted just going through this thing. So anyway, I hope this covers everything you guys were looking for. And if you have any questions, feel free to comment. And I look forward to speaking with you guys and being able to help you out best identify your relationship with extroverted sensing. Look forward the introverted sensing video. Don't know when I'll do it, but it should be coming anytime soon. Thank you so much, and we'll see you next time.